Hello, and welcome to 777 Community Warehouse. My name is Jaquetta Green, and tonight we are here for a special presentation with Dr. Joesph A. Bailey. Tonight our presentation is about where are we at as Black people and what are we going to do to move forward. Now tonight's presentation is with the special man, Dr. Joesph A. Bailey. He was a practicing physician, orthopedic surgeon, orthopedic genetics, and orthopedic medicine physician here in San Bernardino, California. He is extraordinary. He has done a lot of extensive research in ancient African principles. And Dr. Joesph A. Bailey is here tonight with tons of knowledge and truth that we would need to take very seriously. And he has a website, which is www.JABaileyMD.com. And he has been practicing for 40 years, but he's now been retired for 20 years. And during that time, he has devoted his time to the struggling Black people with an emphasis on young Black boys. Now, Dr. Joesph A. Bailey also writes for a local Black newspaper 3 times a week. He has over 1,000 articles flooded with great content and a lot of information and knowledge that you would need to go and research and see for yourself. But we have him here tonight, and we like to welcome Dr. Joesph A. Bailey. Thank you.
Thank you for being here. All of us are born with selfhood greatness. What this means is that there are 3 things. First, we have the drop of God in us, in our souls, the spark of God, the image of God. That gives us all the power we need to do anything. The second thing is we carry the genetics of the most powerful and greatest and wisest people on earth. The third thing is every one of us has a talent that no one has ever had before, that no one has now, no one will ever have again. Each one of us was put here on this earth to do something important to help the entire cosmic organism. You have everything you need in order to be great, in order to thrive in life, in order to be happy. But it won't happen if you don't do anything with it. One of the things that will help you is to learn about your history. This was deliberately destroyed, and it's been deliberately kept away from you, from all of us, because of our greatness. That's the only reason that we as a Black people are singled out to be kept down, because we were so great. And we have the potential to reach that greatness again, and there are people who don't want that to happen. It's been 45 years of research to try to find out information about Black history, and I deal only with the Black mind. I've always wanted to know, what did ancient Africans think? How did they think? What did they think about? Why did they think that way? Then I needed to know, what did African American slaves think and in what way? And I also need to know, what do you think today? And so I've had to gather bits and pieces of information over 45 years, find out who to believe, because you can't believe 99.9% of people who write about black history. You can't believe it. I only know about 5 authors who are all black scholars that I have some degree of confidence in. Then it has been a problem to interpret the information from ancient Africans because they thought on such a high level. They thought with symbols. They thought with symbols and dealt only with principles. Principles are unchanging realities. My problem now is to present it, some of this information to you in a way that I hope that you can understand it. To do this, I've chosen to symbolize ancient Africans and African American slaves and today's black Americans by means of a turtle. And incidentally, we are all related throughout the animal kingdom and everybody in here. We're all related. We're all spiritually related. So that what occurs in a turtle is the same thing that occurs in us. Now, I want to show you three episodes of turtles that represent the black mind as I know it to be. One is from ancient Africa, representing the ancient Africans. The second is representing the African American slaves. And the third is where we are today. With that, I will now have Sharon get started reading to introduce you to what the correlation is between black people and that is symbolized by the turtle.
African traditions turtle. Can you all hear me back there? Turtle features. Similar to the turtle's animal soft parts being inside an armored shell, so is a human's private self, that is the soft parts, inside its public self, that is the shell. What it looks like is a head of selfhood greatness, a shell of thriving, compassion, self-love, courage, beauty, the helper, duty, certainty in God.
Okay, let me stop there. Ancient Africans had no concept of belief or faith in God. They had to know. And in brilliant mathematics, and they were the ones that invented all mathematics. I don't care what you've been taught anywhere. All mathematics came out of Africa in the highest degree. Around 20,000 BC, they started studying the stars and found certain fixed points that could be compatible with laws of nature. It was from these laws of nature that they realized that God cannot be known because the human mind can't conceive of that. Our minds are not that great. But you can know God by God's manifestations. And we are one of God's manifestations. A turtle is one of God's manifestations, trees and everything like that. Now, when the slaves came here, the Europeans could not control them because they had certainty. They had certain knowledge. You can't control somebody when they know something, when they really know something. So their idea was to make all the enslaved ignorant so that they wouldn't know anything. Then the Europeans could tell them what they wanted to tell them. And one of the things that they told them was to have belief and faith in God, not certainty. Because if you have belief and faith in God, then they can tell you what God said. And that's what was done to the slaves.
Just as a fetus develops in the mother's womb and following birth is protected by the family, turtle eggs are deposited in holes in the sandy slopes, covered with sand and left to hatch by the heat of the sun. Inside the egg, its softest of its soft parts are unprotected for the first 15 days following conception. Then the shoulder bones slide inside its rib cage, making room for the shell to grow. This is followed by its ribs moving out and up, eventually fusing to help form the back half of its shell, a part of its exoskeleton called a carapace. In humans, this indicates how the private self gives rise to the public self.
There are two parts to us. A private self that we don't let anybody in on unless we really want to. And then we have a public self that everybody sees, where you have a base underground and you have a foundation underground. This is like the private self. The part above ground is like the public self, the part you see, the part everybody can see. The strongest part of a building is not the foundation, it's the base. Because if you set a skyscraper building on quicksand, you're not going to have a building, no matter how strong the foundation is. So it is out of our private self that our public self comes. This is why I want to start an academy for little black kids and concentrate only on their private self. This is where your self-esteem is and where your heart is and your soul. And you need to have good character. You need to be solid in your private self so that you don't get caught up with what is in the outside world and you think that's more important than the drop of God that you have in your heart. When you start going into outside world things, you are seeing that those things are more important than the God drop you have in you.
Once everything is completed in its development and the turtle breaks out of its egg covering, it relies on its shell armor to protect itself from the teeth and claws of hungry animals. Something like this occurred in ancient Africans, teaching their youth how to self-protect from bad information given by ignorant people and by destructive information given by evil people. When time for self-protection occurs, a mud or musk turtle hisses while withdrawing its head, tail, and legs inside its shell. This is how ancient Africans reacted to being around evil spirits and what free Africans did when enslaved and brought to the Americas. African-American slavery turtle. The enslaved African, symbolized by a turtle simply for descriptive purposes, had a loss of selfhood greatness.
The thing that you see, the first thing that the Europeans had to do was kill the fact that you were great. You see, they've always been very envious of black people. Even the ancient Greeks and the ancient Romans said that they thought high intelligence was associated with black skin. So they had to convert you to the other side of that, to make you think that that's a terrible thing. The first thing they had to do was to make sure that you were no longer great, that you no longer felt great. And they were very shrewd in being able to do that.
With the loss of self-greatness, there was the brute brainwashing, a replaced God, intra-black dissension, and black puppets, all orchestrated by an emotional omnibus brain.
Europeans know that if they can control the black mind, they have to do it by religion. And Africans were absolutely certain in the one universal high God, and this was known for at least 150,000 years. Europeans don't believe in the spiritual. They don't believe in God as we know God to be. They only believe in what they can see. But they make up things to control you. Their major purpose is to control your mind. That's their major purpose. So one of the things that they made up that may be a shock to you is Satan. There is no Satan. Another thing they made up is that there's a hell. There is no hell. There was an ancient African Bible, at least 150,000 years old. Most people don't even know ancient Africans had a Bible. But it was the Bible that all Bibles came out of. Europeans borrowed information out of that ancient African Bible and made changes in it. Ancient Africans wrote in story form so that you could understand what they were saying. The stories were not intended to be taken as real. But Europeans took those same stories that were made up by Africans to explain to the people. They took that same information and made it as a fact. So that, for example, they made Adam and Eve as a fact. Adam and Eve is a Ethiopian story that was tens of thousands of years before the European Bible came out. Tens of thousands of years. And it was just a story to indicate certain things. But now they have you believing, the European Bible has you believing that this is a fact.
The European captors systematically removed their selfhood armor of self-protection, starting with killing their spirits inside their private self, also meaning the loss of their courage and the destruction of their selfhood greatness.
If there was a spirited slave, someone who really stood up to them, they would tar and feather that slave, tie one arm to a horse going this way, one arm to a horse going that way, one leg to a horse behind, and another leg to a horse going that way. They would set him on fire and pull him apart. You're dealing with some vicious people. You don't understand that. But you're dealing with some vicious people. This killed the spirits of the slaves because they had all the slaves watching. And this is called making an example of. And they do it today in the legal system. They put black people in for a lifetime for stealing a candy bar. That's making an example of. This is a pattern that hasn't changed. And it's a pattern that has been used by Europeans for 45,000 years, ever since they came on Earth, 45,000 years ago.
At the same time, the captors dismantled their protective selfhood armor by beating the enslaved into despair, marches to the African coast, the horrible Middle Passage, seasoning of the enslaved, destroying families. 2, generating intra-black dissensions. 3, remolding many enslaved into black puppets. And 4, replacing the universal high God and Africans' certainty in this God with a European-made supernatural God, but calling him the universal high God in whom the enslaved must have faith and belief. That switch allowed afflicted blacks to believe whites had been given the Word of God in the Bible whites made up and published in 1611 for the purpose of using it on the enslaved. Slavery started in 1619.
The European Bible that most of you use is the Word of God. You have no idea how that Bible was written. You would be shocked if you learned the story of how that Bible is written. But to shortcut the story, King James, there were several hundred European Bibles in the 1600s. King James didn't like any of them, so he got a group of people together and said, we're going to write another Bible. But the point was to make this Bible give messages that would cause the slaves to believe that this was the Word of God. The Bible was published in 1611. Slavery started in 1619. They were getting prepared for the slaves with the Bible, because this is how they could convince the slaves, and the slaves were beaten down. I mean, you know, they would walk hundreds and hundreds of miles with no food, no water, over rough lands to get to the African coast. Then they were placed on a ship stacked like sardines in a can. Couldn't turn over. Many of them just went crazy. And they had to stay in that position, lying down for 12 weeks or so. Our African American ancestors were some strong people. There's never been anybody that showed that kind of strength. And then they seasoned the slaves. That's like breaking in a horse, but being mean about it.
Whites could then convey to blacks that slavery was acceptable to God and that blacks should turn the other cheek and be meek while being ideal slaves.
The teachings, you know, that you should be meek and the meek shall inherit the earth and what was the other one? Oh, turn the other cheek, yeah. In other words, I remember when I was a boy, my mother used to tell me, son, turn the other cheek. Well, when I did that, and I got slapped the second time, I said, something not right about this. I mean, we're gonna have to change this one, because this doesn't make sense to me. Now, when you think about it, it doesn't make sense. But it's in the European Bible. It is not in the African Bible. This is something Europeans made up. Do they live by it? You answer that.
Obviously, whites did not or do not live by what they preached. Whites' divide and conquer weapons were effective in breaking up black people, knowing the benefits of doing things together in order to benefit all the group. By whites programming every minute of the day of the enslaved, like what is seen in today's prisons, led to squashing of their sense of self-reliance and self-responsibility. The result was shedding their first law of nature aspects of survival, self-protective and self-preservation instincts.
I don't know where we got this idea that we're not supposed to be selfish. That's the only way you can live. That's the only way you can live. But because we're all together, when we're selfish for each other. And our individual job is to use our talent to the fullest. Independently, each one of us develops your own talent so that everybody benefits. That's the key. Keep that in mind. We are getting away from that. We're getting away from the idea that we are people that need to work together. That's how we survived. It's now at the point where a black person can see another black person struggling and he'll say, that's not my problem. It is your problem. It's always your problem. My life is spent trying to do things to benefit each of you.
The supply of their physical human nature needs, despite being grossly inadequate, designed a bonding with the very evil white people they hated. This I call the evil savior syndrome.
The enslaved were totally dependent upon white people for survival. It didn't matter that they hated the people. They were dependent upon them. And when you're dependent upon somebody that's supplying your physical needs for survival, you bond with them. We are still bonded to white people. You need to realize that and break those bonds. You see, we do these things without thinking why we're doing them. We're doing them because it occurred in slavery, and it was just transmitted out of slavery to us. Now, you think slavery was a long time ago. I talk with ex-slaves. They were my newspaper customers. I heard them. I heard what they said. I was always impressed with them because they said things, they didn't say much, but they said things were very profound. They were very peaceful people.
Because of this bonding, while in a completely vulnerable condition, a state whereby the victims have no judgment about right, wrong, or good, bad, indicated they could be molded by the evil captors into inside-out thinking in the same way they could be molded by loving parents into outside-in thinking.
The protective shell was removed by the captors, piece by piece, mainly with religion first. When you remove the shell, then you're naked. And you can be easily hurt. I mean, this is your private self. They've gotten to your private self. And so when you were at that stage, you were born. And so you could be molded by your parents however your parents decided to mold you. Once the captors removed the shell, the selfhood armor, then they were again in that newborn-like state where they could be molded. And they were molded in the manner of Europeans, not of Africans. And so many of the traits that we have are European traits. You need to understand that so you can get rid of them. because none of them are good. None. Not one. Not even a little bit.
Whereas African traditions outside-in thinking is looking within one's own soul and selfhood greatness for one's power to deal with all aspects of life, inside-out thinking means one looks outside and to others for direction and guidance in how to live and thereby disregard one's soul and selfhood greatness powers.
When you are molded by your parents, you look to your parents. You're looking outside yourself because you are not yet able to look within yourself to come up with the answers. And we are born with all the answers that we need in order to thrive and be happy. We're born with that. And ancient Africans knew that. And so one of the ways, there are two powerful ways of teaching black kids. One of them is called African dialectic. This means that the teacher or the parent brings out the knowledge that is already within you. But if you don't have the maturity and you are stripped of your protection, then you can be molded in the way the people want you to be molded. You can overcome that by recognizing that that's happened. And then you do three things. You do, first, take charge and control of yourself. You don't look to anybody in the outside world or anybody. No books, no TV, no nothing. You look within because you have the answer within you. The second thing is you take charge and control of what you do. The third thing is you take charge and control of the situation you're in. This is what a man does. He does these three things. This is what women do when they get stuff done. This is the answer for you. This is basically the answer. To be in charge and control. Don't ask friends. Friends are ignorant people. They may not be evil, but some of them are. But at least they're ignorant. They don't know. Only you know. Only you have the answer for what's right for you. You can get advice. When I want to know something about a subject, I'll usually go to the janitor or the maid because I can get better information than I can from any authority. I mean, they have a purity about them. It's not a show. They're not trying to impress anybody.
Doing inside-out thinking concerns voting against one's own first law of nature aspects, that is, one's survival, self-protection, and self-preservation instincts. Inside-out thinking allows oneself to be destroyed by oneself and by ignorant and/or evil outsiders. It does not shy away from doing harm to oneself or allowing others to do harm to oneself and/or loved ones.
Doing these things caused the enslaved to think just the opposite of the way they're supposed to think. In other words, Africans were self-reliant. That's what life is about, having self-responsibility. You take care of yourself. But Africans could not, the enslaved could not do that. And so they were dependent upon Europeans, and so they started looking to Europeans for everything, the standards. What makes for a good life? What makes for anything? That's why, so many black guys today are in the bling stuff. This isn't African. This is European. to be so heavily involved in all this material stuff. You need to know what you have taken in from a people that hate you and get rid of that.
Enslaved mothers contributed to this selfhood protection reversal pattern by necessarily having to neglect their own children in order to work for the white family, as well as by demeaning their own children if they showed spirit, for that might get them killed, or by showing brilliance of any type, for that might get them sold away from the family.
They were afraid that if the child showed spirit or talent, that they would be sold away. Now, this is a habit that started in slavery, but it has continued on to the present. I have heard many women tell their sons, you're going to grow up to be no count just like your no count father. That's a devastating message to a kid. You all are like God. You can't tell your sons that, anything like that. You just can't do it. Break that habit. Elevate them. Talk about how great they are. Eliminate the negatives. Accentuate the positives.
All right, thank you. That was Dr. Joesph A. Bailey. Once again, make sure that you dial to his website. It's www.jabailey.md.com. And this is hosted by 777 Community Warehouse, located on 777 South Allen Street in San Bernardino, California. Now, we're going to get into questions and answers with the doctor right now. And could you please come up to the front of the stage and grab the mic and let us know what your question is. All right, thank you.
Hi, everyone. My question is, what is the ancient African Bible and where can we find it from?
The way Africans did things was to do one thing well and then have the next generation or group enlarge upon that thing so that it's almost like a pyramid upside down. Knowledge just kept going in that fashion. Now, this knowledge was placed all over Africa. It was written on walls and and diagrams and hieroglyphics. Ancient Africans invented writing at least around 77,000 BC. And so their writings were on walls, particularly in Nubia, before Egypt, and scattered around different places in Africa. So there was one person by the name of Tahuti. He is a black African that is the master of all masters of all times. The greatest single individual that ever existed, a black African. He was the one that brought all of this information together. And he put it in 42 books. Where that is, I have no idea. But that information and the information that was on temple walls is what constituted the ancient African Bible. I am led by my spiritual entourage, and they tell me what to do, and I do it faithfully, except when they told me to write about the ancient African Bible. Then I said, no, I don't want to do that. Because I grew up in the South, and I know you don't mess with black people's religion. But then they did, like they normally do, they made some incredible things open to me. And I couldn't refuse it. So that's like making me an offer I couldn't refuse. And so I went ahead and put that book together, accumulating knowledge that I don't think anybody else could ever gather, because I had a wide variety of sources open to me. And so I put that into a book, not to represent the Bible, but to give as much details as I could about it, okay. and then elaborated and talked about how the principles went on into all aspects of life throughout the ages.
My question is a follow-up question to the first question. Expanding on the African ancient Bible and their stories, can you possibly expand further on how you got to the conclusion where you felt that their stories were made up?
Repeat the last part of that.
Can you expand on how you felt that the African ancient Bible their stories were actually made up stories?
Okay. As I mentioned before, ancient African sages thought at the highest possible level. They thought in symbols, and they dealt only with principles, which is incidentally the highest way anybody wants to learn to think. That is to be modeled. Now, this information was at such a high level, and they understood the principles of nature and the laws of the cosmos to the point that they could manipulate those laws or put those laws together and create things, which is very powerful information. Now, they didn't want anybody to know this because they were afraid it would be abused. So the thing that they did was they made up stories. One was allegories. Allegories are a story within a story. If any of you are familiar with fables, you know that there's a story, but it has a moral to it. And the moral is usually spelled out. But in the allegory, it is not spelled out, and only people who are at a certain level of thinking are able to understand the story inside that. Now, to help you be familiar with this, this is what the slaves did in coming up with the Negro spirituals. The Negro spirituals were designed to confuse white people who were listening. And the white people thought that the spirituals are about being religious and things of that sort. But there were messages within that, as to, for example, wade in the water. In other words, if you're going to escape tonight, go through the river. Don't go by land. And so there were all kinds of messages within the Negro spirituals that it informed slaves how to escape. This is what happened with the ancient African sages. Now, they gave this material that they knew to exist, that they thought the people would benefit from, to storytellers. And those storytellers are called griots, G-R-O-I-T-S. They made stories out of them so that the principle was present in the story, but it wasn't the information that the sages had given them. The message was in the story, but it was an interesting story. And that's called metaphors. And so the ancient African Bible is written in metaphors, these stories that explain principles for how to live. And when the Europeans copied the ancient African Bible, they didn't realize that these stories were stories, and they thought that they were fact, or they wanted them to be fact, and that's how they put them into their Bible.
Good evening, Dr. Bailey.
Good evening.
My question is short. I just came today for the first time, but could you elaborate a little bit about the importance of the family in the African tradition versus the European tradition? What were the viewpoints of the family in the community at large?
In African tradition, the family is the unit, and everything spins out of the family. The community is responsible for every child. The community knew that every child was born with a talent. It was their job to help that child discover that talent and then to develop that talent. They emphasized getting along with people, having good behaviors with and good relationships with all people, because all people are connected spiritually. Punishments were given out for children who showed selfishness and did not consider the feelings of other people. But the community would oversee that punishment to make sure that the punishment was not too severe. So everything was under control by all the people. The whole idea of African family is based upon the 4 spiritual elements: unconditional love, truth, reality, and the natural. Unconditional love had to be shown to everybody. This was fundamental. By contrast, Europeans did not believe in those 4 spiritual elements. They don't believe in unconditional love. They don't believe in truth. They don't believe in reality. They don't believe in the natural. I've had 13 years of training after college. At no time have I ever been taught the truth. At no time have you ever been taught the truth. You may not know that, but you haven't been. I got little bits of the truth from the black community when I was a boy, but I was never taught anything that was truthful. Now, if you don't believe in the spiritual, then everything in the world has a boundary around it. So what Europeans do is they put a boundary around love. And this is called conditional love. African love is unconditional love because you love no matter what. Now, conditional love is used by Europeans to control the children. In other words, they say, I won't love you if you do so and so. Or if you love me, you will do so and so. It's a condition. They would withhold love from a child if that child didn't obey. So these were completely different approaches to how Europeans and Africans dealt with love. Now, you can also see that pattern to this day. I have never had a white friend that showed unconditional love. I've never had one. There's always something that's more important. Maybe it's to sell you something, or maybe it's to get something, or maybe it's to take advantage of you, or something. But there's something in there that's for their benefit. When you have unconditional love, you are willing to put up with a lot of stuff from people, and yet you keep coming back. It's very hard for me to deal with black people because they don't, the ones that I have dealt with don't want to be helped, or they want to be helped the way they want to be helped, not the way they need to be helped. And the way they want to be helped is detrimental. So I can't go along with that. And every time I'm refused, which is almost every day, I keep trying to come up with some other way. Maybe I can try something else to see if this will get through. That, to me, is unconditional love. I get no benefit, I get no reward, I get no money, I get nothing but a hard time. And yet, I am dedicated to doing what I can to see if I can make you successful and thrive in life. That's how I see it.